Welcome to another training video by H-Impact. This is Travis L. Holt, Senior Software Engineer here at H-Impact. In this video, we will continue working on the grid we started in our last video, in which we added both the city chart and the city list components. We will cover how to retrieve SQL data using a get or read CRUD method from our data service. Once retrieved, the data will be displayed in our grid. Along with C#, we will use some Razor code, HTML, CSS, and Bootstrap. Ultimately, this data will be used to build charts from the ChartJS JavaScript library. We are using Microsoft Visual Studio Community 2019 and Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio 2019 with a SQL Server Express installation. All software is free and is available on Microsoft's website for download. I have included the links in the description below. Also, if you missed the previous BlazorChartJS video, which covered how to create the city list and city chart components, register our data service as a part of .NET Core's dependency injection container, and create our custom grid to display and manage our SQL data, I've left the link in the description, as well as the project source code. If you are new to our channel and enjoy the content, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification button to be alerted when we release our next video. Let's get started. First, we need to reference the city service that we registered in the last episode in the configure services method of the startup class as part of .NET Core's dependency injection container. At the top of the component above the Hello World H1 HTML element, we need to add a using statement for the city service namespace. @using BlazorChartJS.data. Great. We also need to add a using statement for the namespace for the city class. @using BlazorChartJS.models. Nice. Finally, we need to inject a reference of the city service which we registered as a part of .NET Core's dependency injection container in the startup class. @inject city service camel case city service. Now, let's add some logic to our component. Let's scroll down to the code section of the component. In the code section, we need to add properties or fields to store a single city or a list of cities. Let's add a property to store a single city. Prop tab gives us the template for the property we need to add. Data type city, lowercase city. Great. Now let's add a property to store a list of cities. Prop tab data type IEnumerable of city, property name city list camel case. Excellent. Now we need to add a method that retrieves all the records in the cities table from the ChartStats database. We need to use the city services getAllCities method that we created in the data service, CRUD, and EF Core episode. If you missed the episode when we created the data service, I've left the link in the description. Public, keyword async, keyword task, method name load cities async. Now, let's retrieve and assign all cities to the city list IEnumerable interface. City list equals await keyword, city service dot get cities async, parentheses. Now we need to call the method when the component loads to make sure the data is current and available each time the page displays. We need to override the onInitializeAsync method of the base Razor component to accomplish this. This method is invoked when the component is ready to start. Protected, override keyword, async keyword, task keyword, onInitializeAsync. Let's call the async method to load the data from the database and refresh the component when completed. Await keyword, load cities async. Now let's instantiate a city object and assign it to the city property to be used later. City equals new city, parentheses. Now, let's add a comment on the line of load cities async to identify when we call the database. Let's do a little more housekeeping to help organize our code. Let's add sections to group our code depending on the code's purpose. We'll divide the code into two regions. 1. Fields and properties for component level variables and properties. 2. Methods for all procedures or events with or without return values. Right above the first property, type $region. Name the region, fields, and properties. Below the last property, type $end region. Nice. Now, let's add the region for methods. Right above the first method, type $region. Methods for the region name. And below the last method, type $end region. Now, let's test the regions by collapsing and expanding them. Excellent. Our regions work successfully. Now, let's update the grid we started to display these records in the HTML table. To do this, we need to add some Razor code in the form of a for each loop that wraps the tr_HTML element. This loop will retrieve and display each record from the cities database table. Razor code is server-side code like C# or VB.NET, prefixed with the @ sign embedded in HTML. We need to loop through the city objects retrieved from the load cities async method, which was assigned to the city list property. Let's move down to the rows where we have the hard-coded cities. We have 2 rows in our sample data. We only need one to loop as a template for each row in our table. Let's delete the row for City 1 with the teal color. Collapse the table row element for City 1. Select and highlight the table row element. To remove the element, press Delete. Nice. We'll add a for each loop around the tr HTML element. @ for each, parentheses, city data type, item variable name, in city list. Now we need to move this curly brace to the bottom of the table row element. Nice. Now let's replace the hard-coded values for City 2 with database-bound city property values. Let's start with City ID. @ item dot city ID. For city name, @ item dot city underscore name. Population, @ item dot population. Now for the hex color background color, @ item dot hex color. And for the label for the hex color, @ item dot hex color. Now the same for RGBA. For the background color, @ item dot RGBA color. And for the label, @ item dot RGBA color. Since we are only retrieving data for this video, we'll leave the delete button and the edit hyperlink for a future video. Okay, we're almost there. Let's see what happens if we run the app now. Great. The BlazorChartJS app's homepage loads successfully. Now, let's use the nav menu component that we updated in our last video to navigate to the city_list URL. The hard-coded City 1 and City 2 placeholder records should no longer exist. Click the City Population menu link to navigate to the city's URL. And we get an error. It's a system.null reference exception to be exact. Because I've run into this error in the past, I happen to know what the problem is. The problem occurs as a result of our async call to retrieve the city records, which are assigned to our IEnumerable of city list property. We can fix this by adding an if statement to check the city list property to see if it is null before we try to display the records. Let's stop the application from running and add this if statement. Now, collapse the table element. Between the div and table element, add the following comment. Critical. If statement prevents null exception due to async loading. Now for the if statement. Add sign if. City list. Equals null. Now let's add a div inside the curly braces with the label loading cities. And for the else statement, let's display the table. We'll need to move this curly brace to the end of the table. This if statement takes care of a null exception for the city list object. To bulletproof our code, let's add another if statement to check the count of the city list property. If the count is greater than 0, we display the table. Otherwise, we will display a paragraph stating no records are available. City list dot count is greater than 0. We need to display the table. Else, we display a paragraph stating no cities available. Paragraph tag, no city records available. In the paragraph tag, I think that was it. Let's collapse the div now and format it. Right-click, Format Selection, and then expand the div. There we go. Time for the moment of truth. Let's give it another shot. Okay, our app still loads. Now, if everything goes okay, the city chart component should display our records in our grid. Also, the hard-coded City 1 and City 2 placeholder records will no longer exist. Click City Population to navigate to the city's URL. Excellent. Our city list, which also loads the city chart component, loads without issue, and all records from our database are listed within the grid. Also, the if statement we put in at the end worked successfully as well. Before the grid loaded, the text loading cities displayed. If you recall, these are the test records we loaded using T-SQL insert statements in the Create SQL Database episode. If you missed that episode, I've left the link in the description. Notice the Bootstrap and CSS we added in the last video formatted our data as expected. As you can see, the hex and RGBA color values from the database are properly displayed. The HTML correctly displays the background color values in conjunction with the Bootstrap alert classes. That's all of it. If you have any questions on creating the city list and city chart Razor components and creating our custom grid using C#, Razor, HTML, CSS, and Bootstrap, leave a comment below and I'll do my best on getting back to you. In the next video, we'll continue working on our custom grid in the city chart component. We need to handle the see or create for our CRUD operations. Instead of writing T-SQL manually, we will use this component with our data services insert method to insert a city record into the ChartStats database. In the meanwhile, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Click the notification button. Give us a thumbs up with a like and share this video. Comments with or without a question are great too. Again, this is Travis L. Holt. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this training video from himpact.com.